Hey, babe.
Yeah, babe.
What's the deal with the Shanghai tunnels?
Oh. I can tell you all about that.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Welcome back to the Hey Babe Podcast. I am your host, Caitlin Cook, joined again and always by my fabulous co-host,
Chris.
Yeesh. And this is our fourth? This is our fourth episode of Hey Babe. We've done it now for a month. Good on us.
Wow.
1 month anniversary.
Holy shit.
Yeah.
So consistent.
I was going to say, take that, consistency. We're doing it. Yeah, so little backstory for this week's episode. In case you don't know, which you probably don't, there's also probably none of you to speak of. Who knows if anyone's listening to this? Who cares? Just kidding. If you are, we love you. Chris and I live in Portland, Oregon. We have lived here for over 8 years.
No way.
Yeah, pretty much makes us not natives because we're not from here, but we're pretty much like we're there.
I remember when that building wasn't there. It's orange groves as far as the eye could see.
Yeah, we can officially say like, oh yeah, I remember before everything changed. Which means that we are douchebags. I mean, we've lived here a while.
That's
Just
true.
kidding. So we thought for our 1 month anniversary of the podcast, actually, we didn't really think about that too much in advance, but we thought we should do something about Portland. We should really bring it home, so to speak. Right?
Yeah, no, we've been here a long time, and there's all kinds of fun stuff around these parts.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'll definitely probably be hearing more inebriated questions about Portland come up, and we will try to answer them because there's just so much shit that goes on here.
Hazelnuts. How do you even grow those?
I love how that's where you go. Not any of the other cool things about Portland, but hazelnuts. This week, we are going to talk about something that, if you've never been to Portland, it may be like, wah? When we say this, you may not know what the fuck we're talking about. And if you've ever visited Portland, you may kind of know what we're talking about, but it's the Shanghai tunnels. And I will just, in the beginning of this, disclaimer, all of that. I am not sure if Shanghai is now a racial slur of some sort or something that I'm not supposed to be saying. I am, because who knows? I'm not sure. It seems like it would be like not appropriate to say.
I mean, context, right?
Context, yeah. I want to say that if I throughout this episode say the word Shanghai a lot, it's not because I'm being a dick. It's because I'm referencing either historical documents, quotes, or just sort of modern what it's known by. So if there's anyone out there that gets offended by that, I'm sorry. I just don't know what else to call it because that's sort of what it's called. But I feel like there might be a ness to it.
Well, we welcome corrections to all three of you if one of you are
offended by it. I just want to put that out there that I'm not just willy-nilly using that word in case it is something that's not the nicest. But there is something in Portland. It's called the Shanghai tunnels. There's this it's a tourist draw for one. It's this sort of like, I don't know. It's like it's a part of the backbone of the history of Portland. Everyone knows of the Shanghai tunnels. It's these underground tunnels that exist under the world under the city of Portland. And there's a variety of things that have happened, apparently, quote unquote, in these tunnels. So we wanted to talk about them more because it's such a huge part of Portland. But a lot of people in Portland don't know the real story about them. Like, they have no idea. So we're here to talk about that. But if we're going to talk about the Shanghai tunnels,
Yes,
we got to take it back a little bit before that. Let's talk about the history of Portland just a little bit. Because I don't want to go too deep into it, but just to set the stage and the sort of time frame, let's talk about Portland. So large numbers of pioneer settlers. Do you say settlers or settlers?
Settlers is the fun way to say it.
Is that like
settlers.
the old-timey way? Timey, I guess, because I just said settlers.
Yeah, I don't like it.
You don't like settlers?
I like settlers.
Oh, okay.
I don't like the other.
So large numbers of pioneer settlers, they began arriving in the Willamette Valley in the 1830s via the Oregon Trail and settling in nearby Oregon City. And good for them. They survived the Oregon Trail. They didn't get dysentery.
No.
They weren't bit by any snakes.
No bobcats.
Yeah, those are literally the only two stereotypical things I remember about the Oregon Trail was dysentery and bit by a snake. So good on you for remembering bobcats.
I mean,
or are you just speculating?
I'm pulling that out. There's a big cat. There's a big cat that gets you. Could be a cougar.
Who knows? Courtney Cox was known to be a huge part of the Oregon Trail.
Yeah, she fed on the pioneers.
That's how she's still around today. She's usurped their souls.
Yeah, she did.
So, by the 1840s, a new settlement 10 miles from the mouth of the Willamette River, which was, by the 1840s, a new settlement sprung up about 10 miles from the mouth of the Willamette River, which was actually initially called Stumptown or the Clearing.
No shit.
Because of all the trees that had to be cut down to make room for the growth. See, if you're not familiar with Portland, Stumptown is like, it's still to this day like a nickname for Portland. It's called Stumptown. There's Stumptown Roasters, Stumptown Coffee, Stumptown everything.
Yeah, that's what I think of.
And I never understood. I was like, what is Stumptown? Like, I don't understand why we're calling ourselves Stumptown. And I never, until this moment, well, not this moment, but until I was doing the research for this, I never put it together that they meant tree stump. And that it was literally trees being cut down to make room for the city. So they called it Stumptown. I'm an idiot, but it took me 8 years to apparently realize
Don't beat yourself up, baby.
So then in 1843, William Overton is a well-known name in Portland. It's on streets and everything.
Overy Lane.
He saw potential in this sort of site that had come about, but he didn't have the money to file a land claim. So he agreed to share half of the site with this person named, and I don't know how to say this, and it's something that is in Portland still, but I still don't know how to say it. Asa or Asa, A-S-A Lovejoy.
Okay, like the Asa Apartments?
I think it's Asa.
Asa?
I think it's Asa. There's an apartment complex called the Asa Apartments. I think it's Asa, but it's A-S-A Lovejoy. Lovejoy is the name of a street also here in Portland.
Yes,
also the name of Reverend Lovejoy, who everyone now knows the Simpsons live in Springfield, Oregon. Take that, other Springfields.
Suck it. Kids.
So Asa Lovejoy was from Boston, which that will come up later. That's why I mention it. But by like 2 years later, by 1845, he just was like over it and he sold his remaining half to Francis W. Pettygrove, which again, Pettygrove is in Portland, streets in Portland.
It's another street.
And he was from Portland, Maine. So Pettygrove and Lovejoy, they wanted to change the name because literally still at this point, it was just called Stumptown or The Clearing. It was mostly known as The Clearing more than Stumptown.
Really?
Yeah, it was just because it was just like a site that people, it was like, oh, it's The Clearing. It's just like a site where there's trees have been cleared. It wasn't a town or anything
Stumptown just sounds cooler though.
Well, no, I know.
Look at The Clearing.
They wanted to make it like more of an official like name. But they couldn't decide because they wanted to both name it after their hometown, but they couldn't decide which one to name it after, Boston or Portland. So they were adult business people, and they settled it the way you would any sort of adult business person deal.
Cockfighting.
No, a coin toss.
Oh.
They literally tossed a penny
style.
to decide the new town, what it would be called. And they did like a best 2 out of 3 with the penny toss, and Penny Grove won, which meant that the new town would be called Portland. Fun fact, fun fact. The penny that they used, which is now known as the Portland penny, is actually on display in the headquarters of the Oregon Historical Society.
Really?
You can go and see. I don't know where that is because I didn't do that much research. But the actual penny that they used to be like, leave it up to the fates. What's the name of our town going to be? It's on display. They still have it. It's called the Portland penny.
Dang.
So yeah, without going into, because again, we're here to talk about a very specific part of Portland history. We're not here to talk about the entirety of Portland history. So without going into like the crazy details of the background of Portland, basically at the time of its incorporation on February 8th, 1851, Portland had over 800 inhabitants. It had a steam sawmill, a log cabin hotel, and a newspaper. But then in 1873, a fire swept through downtown, destroying 20 blocks on the west side and causing $1.3 million in damages.
Back then?
In 1873.
Damn.
$1.3 million in damages. I'm not going to go into how they rebuilt or anything, but by 1890, the population had grown to 46,385 people. The reason the population boomed was really because of Portland's access to the Pacific Ocean via the Willamette and Columbia rivers, as well as the Tualatin Valley, which gave it kind of the advantage over nearby ports.
Yeah, big port town, baby.
It's a port land. They didn't think of that when they were tossing that coin.
We're tossing that salad.
Okay, how dare you.
Sorry.
So Portland developed a reputation early on in its history as like a dangerous, gritty, and sort of hard port town. They were like, oh, Portland is just, it's full of like bad people and it's so dangerous. It's
so
just
edgy.
Gritty. Yeah. Out of all the port towns that we know, like literally a historian described the city's early establishment as being a, quote, scion of New England, an ends of the earth home for the exiled spawn of the Eastern established elite.
Was it like Far Harbor?
That's kind of what I was like thinking.
A bunch of people just walk around t-shirts. Yeah.
Betty Crocker. We're referencing all of our old episodes.
No Ray Kroc though. He was still.
No, he was still
a sparkle
wasn't yet
in some
a
dude's
piece of
eye.
shit. In 1889, the Oregonian. So the Oregonian is still a newspaper now, but that was their like newspaper back when I was like, they had a sawmill and a log cabin. It was the Oregonian was like their newspaper, which is still around now.
Old school.
So in 1889, the Oregonian called Portland the most filthy city in the northern states due to the unsanitary sewers and gutters. And by the turn of the 20th century, it was considered one of the most dangerous port cities in the world. In the world.
Nothing but murders and pickled products.
Birds on things.
Birds on. You people carve a bird into your flesh.
At that time, the city was home to a large number of saloons, bordellos, gambling dens, opium dens, and boarding houses populated mostly by miners after the gold rush.
Shit, yeah.
Right?
Kids are hardcore.
So as they were building the city up, a series of underground tunnels was developed underneath the Old Town Chinatown neighborhood, which connected the basements of many hotels and taverns to the waterfront of the Willamette River. They were built to kind of move goods from the ships docked on the river to the basement storage areas, allowing businesses to basically avoid like the streetcar and like traffic, the train traffic on the streets when they were like delivering stuff.
Yeah.
So they were like, it's going to be busy on the streets. We don't want to deal with that. Let's just build tunnels underneath. It'll go right to the ships and right back to our thing.
That's a good idea.
This was also at a time that there was a lot of like gang activity happening in Chinatown. At the time too, like as nice and inclusive and wonderful as Portland is now, back then being the most dangerous, gritty, terrible city in the world. Spoiler alert, they weren't nice to people that weren't white, basically. Yeah. And being on the west coast of the United States, there was a lot of Asian sort of immigrants coming to America. And, you know, it was easier for them to get to the west side of the United States versus anywhere else in the United States. Mm-hmm. So because there was this like gang activity happening in Chinatown had a lot of Chinese and Japanese owned businesses. It was kind of just like, ooh, we're not loving that part of town. Like a lot of the sort of white people were just like, no thanks. Like we're not about that. So these tunnels, like they started to be used because of this gang activity by the gambling dens, the brothels, the opium parlors as a way for people to escape into the far alleyways. Like when rival gangs, because there was gangs, when they would show up, they'd be like, shit, like let's get out of here. And they would use these tunnels underneath. When the cops would show up and try and raid them, they would use these tunnels to like escape. Right before that, though, police were mostly paid off. Like, police were generally like, we're paid off. We're good. We're going to ignore everything you're doing. Mm-hmm. But then, as the system of kind of bribery started unraveling and it wasn't happening as much, the cops started getting ballsy and sort of just they'd bring like sledgehammer axes to like the doors of these businesses as like a fuck you for not getting their money.
Right.
They were like, we know you're doing shit that's not legal. We've looked the other way because you've paid us off for so long. Now that you're not paying us, we are not fans of you. We're going to break down your fucking doors all the time. Excuse me.
Oh, damn.
Excuse me even more. My. So then by 1913, the city government created what they called the Secret Passages Ordinance, which was really, like, it was hotly contested as being discriminatory against the Chinese because it basically allowed police to raid businesses with underground tunnels to be like, we know you're using these for, nefarious reasons. Some of you are.
Crime.
But they almost, like, all of the businesses that had the underground tunnels were basically, like, Chinese or Japanese owned. So, like, the Chinese people, the business owners and the Japanese business owners were like, well, this sucks because there's you're only
targeting
you're
us.
Doing this against us because you don't like us. And not all of us are in gangs and doing this shit. You're just targeting us to, like, raid us at any moment. And that's not fair. So this time you're also seeing more and more newspaper articles talking about the dangers of the tunnels, quote unquote, and how terrible the Chinese business owners were. Except they were using much more. They weren't saying Chinese business owners.
Yeah,
they were saying really racist stuff, calling them terrible names, and it was just totally allowed. And I'm not going to say the stuff that they were calling them because that's not nice, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But they were just saying that they're terrible, they're business owners, they were these horrible people that were doing these terrible things, and that's what these tunnels were for.
They were... You can say what they called them.
No.
You say it all the time when the microphone's not on.
Okay. That's not funny. Don't be a jerk.
Get around. She doesn't say those things at all. She does say the N-word a lot, though.
Okay, no, I don't. Stop it. Some of these people may not know us, and they don't know your weird sense of humor where you're just like...
Everybody knows. If you've heard her sweet pipes, you know she's an angel.
Some of these people don't know me.
Oh.
You're making me seem like a monster.
She's an angel, ladies and gentlemen.
Anywho.
Anyways.
Jeez. So they kept talking about stuff like these, they've got trap doors and these sliding panels and all this trickery to be able to escape and craziness. But the biggest threat that they were saying was something called Shanghaiing.
Ooh.
They described this practice in the newspaper as basically getting some poor, unsuspecting fellow so drunk, or just flat out drugging their one drink, to the point where they were like, rah, blotto. And then they would activate like a trap door that was underneath the bar, like underneath each stool. They were like, they'd flip this switch and then the trap door would open and then that guy would fall through the floor into the tunnel underneath the business. And then he would just be carried off to ships and sold into slavery. First of all, I'm sorry, but I just have to say right now, who wouldn't notice just like a dude sitting at a bar and then trapdoor underneath of him falls and he just like, woo, falls into the ground. Like,
they make a great fucking sex on the beach, but
I feel like someone would have noticed that. So this is a story that is still talked about today. There's walking tours. There's, people argue. Like when you say like, Shanghai tunnels and this is what happened. There's people that argue it. There's literal walking tours that are like, I'm going to take you down the Shanghai tunnels. But I am here to tell you that while the underground tunnel systems were used for a variety of nefarious purposes, Shanghaiing was not one of them. It wasn't.
get out of town.
No, and I'm not saying that Shanghaiing didn't happen, but rather that it didn't happen the way that the myth proposes it happened. So let's talk about what Shanghaiing, that's a really hard word to say. Shanghaiing. Let's talk about what it really was.
Doing Shanghai, don't say that.
Well, no, because it's called Shanghaiing. In multiple reports, that's what it's hard. Called. I know, but I have to report facts. I am a worthy source, a creditable source of facts.
That's true.
I don't know about that, but so they call it Shanghaiing.
Everything you've ever said on here is a fact.
Every single thing. Courtney Cox would usurp young men on the Oregon Trail as a cougar and steal the essence of their soul, and that's why she's still around now.
Bathed in their blood.
No, let's talk about what Shanghaiing really was. So when ships would dock pretty much at any city, the sailors would stay in sailors' boarding houses, which were basically like hotels or hostels, but specifically for sailors.
Were they free?
No.
Was it a hostel so you could just kind of chill?
No, a hostel's not free.
I've never been. I don't know these things.
We've never been to Europe, so we've never been to a hostel. We're also not in our 20s anymore, so we'll never get to experience
I've never gone backpacking
through Europe. No, hostels aren't free, though. That's 1,000%. That's not a thing.
Oh, dear. Do rich people pay a lot of money to kill people in hostels?
If we are taking movies as fact, then yes.
That's how I was introduced to a hostel, is through a movie.
So basically, these boarding houses were like hotels or hostels, but for sailors, specifically for sailors. And the masters of the boarding houses were sort of known as, it wasn't like an established thing, but like on the side, they were known as crimps. Crimps. C-R-I-M-P-S. Like crimped hair, like crimps. Which was a name that like kind of harkened back to the press gangs of the British Navy, which were gangs that kidnapped like able-bodied men out of tavern, off the streets, and even from their own homes to fill up ranks needed by the Royal Navy. So these masters operated a very lucrative scam that went like this. So at the time, the majority of the world's maritime trade was done on British vessels. Mm-hmm. So if a ship was contracted to like make a delivery or a trade or whatever, and they left from England, they would sail all the way to Portland. They'd go all the way like around South America. Like it was crazy. They'd go all the way to Portland. They'd make their delivery or whatever. And then they would sail all the way back to England. That's like a 20,000 mile voyage.
Jesus.
It would take 6 to 8 months to do it.
Yeesh.
Could you imagine? Getting from England to Portland now is like what? Like a 20-hour flight? Yeah. It would take 6 to 8 months back in the day. Which, that's just blows my mind. Crazy. But the kind of fucked up thing is that the sailors that were on the ship, they weren't paid until they returned back to England. So they'd have to go all the way from England to Portland, all the way from Portland back to England, and then they'd finally get paid. So, by the time the ship would arrive to Portland, a lot of those sailors were like 100% over it. They were like, I've been on a boat for 3 months. I hate it. This is the worst. What the fuck? So these crimps, they knew that. And so they would send what they called runners to try and entice the crew to abandon the ship by offering them like really good food. Like, you can come and like have good times at my boarding houses. We've got ladies, we've got booze and all the things you'd want. And they would say like, oh, plus you have the chance to sign on to a vessel with even higher pay. So, like, not only are you going to, like, get laid, get fed, enjoy your damn self, but you're going to make more money if you just abandon this ship.
It's a good deal.
And so almost every sailor said yes. And the kind of weird part about it, or I guess, like, whatever part of it, is that the original, like, captain, like, the original ship's captain, he was fine with it because any amount of money that those sailors were going to get paid, if they didn't make it back to England, he just got that money. So it was like, oh, okay, like, cool. You didn't, like, join back after we docked in Portland. Cool, you don't make the money that you were gonna get paid. I now get it. Right. So for him, it was like, all right, fine, whatever. And then the crimps also kind of made out because, you know, these sailors, they were, you know, being taken to, the crimps of these various boarding houses were happy because now they had these sailors over a barrel. They could charge the sailors whatever they wanted. Right. They did. They charged them these exorbitant fees for everything. Food, booze, girls, rooms, anything they could charge, they did. Right. And then what happened is that this made the sailors go into debt to the boarding houses. It's kind of like back in the day with coal miners. They would work for the coal mining, the factory or whatever it's called. And they would be paid, like they would live in company shacks. They would get paid with partially in company credit to the company store, or they'd get paid in credit to the company store. And so they really were never making any money because they had to pay their rent back to the company. They had to pay for their food, this, that, whatever, at the company store, which was going to the company. So they were basically like indentured servants. Like they weren't actually making money. They were making credit to give back to the company, or money that was for rent. Yeah, never ended up making money. So, but in the case of the sailors, the room and board and all the other expenses that they racked up at the boarding house, they would always end up taking, like the boarding house would always end up taking their like advanced pay, quote unquote, from that better paying ship that they promised them. Yeah. So it'd be like, oh, I'm sorry you racked up all this fucking debt, all this money. Well, this ship that now needs you, like they were going to pay you X amount of dollars, but that's what you owe. So then that ship's captain would just pay the boarding house instead. He'd be like, well, I was going to pay this dude, but he owes you all this money, so I'll pay you what he owes, and that way I get him. And he's now debt-free from you. Right. So I'm paying off his debt in return for him now working for me.
That's confusing.
And they would just pay, and at the whatever they were going to pay at the end of the journey, they would just, give to the crimps. And so the sailor never ends up earning any money, because then he gets to the new port, he gets to the new, after the trip is over from Portland back to England or whatever. He doesn't get paid money because the captain's like, yeah, dude, the money I was going to give you, I had to give to that dude at the boarding house back in Portland. You worked off the debt you then owed me because I paid your debt. So a crimp in England would be like, or a runner for a crimp in England would be like, hey, dude, you don't have any money? I can get you on a better paying ship. Come stay at my boarding house, and we'll take care of you. We've got good food, good this, good that. It would just be this never ending cycle. Excuse me. And it was really, it was fucked up, because they never ended up making any money. But then there would be these times when there were no more sailors. So say in Portland, the crimp and the runner, they had just, all of their boarding house was empty because they had sent all of the sailors to the next better paying job, and whatever. So when there was no more sailors to ship, and that's what they would call that sort of practice of like taking you off of one vessel, sending you to another, but then you owe them money, When they didn't have any more sailors to do that, but they wanted money, they would resort to quote unquote shipping landlubbers. Ooh. Which is known as Shanghaiing.
That's the one.
That's where Shanghaiing comes from. That's where that. So these crimps would basically sweet talk, and they would trick young men, which were usually farm boys and, like, for lack of a better word, hobos, into this sort of like romantic idea of setting sail on the high seas, seeking adventure, like all of the like romance novel sort of like idea of like what you think sailing is. And for the farm boys, it was a chance to like get out of town. They were like, finally, I don't have to work on a fucking farm anymore. I can get out and explore and become a man.
Change of atmosphere, big time.
And then for the hobos, it was just like a chance of like stability, food, shelter, etc.
Chance not to be murdered and then ground up and served up to your fellow hobos.
There you go.
That's the thing that happened back then.
Is that really a thing? You're lying.
It's a fact.
I look at your face and I know you're lying. So, if they couldn't quite seal the deal, though, with their sort of like their words alone, like this sort of like idea of like, ooh, don't you want to like go and be adventurous and be like a sailor? If they couldn't do that with their words alone, they would just get them drunk. They would get them so drunk that they would either go themselves and sign the ship's papers, which was basically a contract for their service, or they'd get them so drunk that they'd pass out, and the crimp would send someone who worked for him down to the ship and be like, yeah, no, I'm Barry Smith, signing to be a contract. I'm signing my ship's papers. I'll report back tomorrow. And these papers were so serious. Like, once a name was signed, the full force of the law, be it local, state, or federal, would make sure the new sailor went to sea. It was basically like signing up for the army. So, like, these dudes could be passed, and there's no way to verify. Like, if I went down and signed your name, all they see is a signature. So it's like, oh, Chris Ham reporting for duty the next day. And if you didn't show up, they'd be like, we're getting the law after him.
Call the cops.
Then there are actual photos, just to show how serious this was. There are actual photos of sailors being held at gunpoint to stay aboard the ship they're on, because they were shanghaied. So they were forced upon these boats. They'd wake up in like a drunken stupor, like, what happened? And they were like, oh, you signed up for this like 8-month contract. You're about to sail 20,000 miles or whatever, and end up in a foreign land. Doesn't matter if you have a wife and kids here in Portland. Doesn't matter. Like, you're on this boat. And so there's literally photos of them just being like, but I don't want to. Like, that's partially, I don't know if it's originally, but like it goes hand in hand with that term jump ship.
Right.
Because there were literally times where men would try to jump overboard just to avoid, and jump onto other ships to avoid having to stay, because they were like, I didn't sign up for this. Why is this happening to me?
Yeah, it's fair.
And so with all of this, I know what you're thinking. Go ahead. What are you thinking?
McDonald's apple pies.
No.
Shit.
I'm sure you're probably also thinking, so all of this Shanghaiing, it still could be done. It still could have been done through the tunnels, though, right? Like,
right.
I know you said like Shanghai tunnels isn't a thing, and it didn't need to be. So it could have been done, right? But honestly, it didn't need to be. For one, these were people that were technically volunteering. So why would they need to like hide it in some way? Like, they wouldn't need to, like, if Chris Ham was like, yeah, fuck, I want to sign up for the ship that I'm going to do it. Why would you need to then escort that dude that was voluntarily like all about it? Because he was convinced through the romanticizing of life at the high seas. You wouldn't need to sneak him through a tunnel to get to the ship. Like, it wouldn't be a necessity. Also, there was a guy named Tony Arnold who's documented. There are documents proving this, whose job it was to transport inebriated men to the ships in order for them to sign their papers.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, these crimps, they paid Tony Arnold, who brought them with like a Hackney cab, which I think is one of those like rickshaw type. I'm not really know, but like he ran like a business like that, and he was paid to bring them on the road, like alongside the streetcars and the trains, and like he was just like, yep, this inebriated dude is in the back of my cab. I'm taking him to the ship.
This is my job.
This crimp paid me. This dude said he was going to sign the papers. I'm taking him because he can't walk. He's so inebriated. So there's literal documentation. Crimps and bloods. No, I don't know. I'm just trying to now think of words that rhyme with crimp that are similar. But no, there's like literal documentation of someone being paid to do this on the surface streets. So if that was the case, why would they use the tunnels? Another thing was that before the Willamette River was dammed, the Portland waterfront was built on a double-decked system. So you can see various photos of the time that during the heavy shipping season, which was like the high one, the water was so high that any tunnels that would have existed would have been flooded, making them unusable. So like when all of this like heavy shipment, boat traffic, whatever you want to call it, would have been happening, anything even close to a tunnel underneath of a building would have been flooded. Like basements used to flood during this time, because it was just like, that's what happens when you're this close to a river. So again, they wouldn't have been able to even use these tunnels for that purpose. Also, at the time, if the boarding house was powerful enough, or if the person, quote unquote, being like shanghaied was of a low enough social class, especially vagrants or hobos. The shanghaiing could be done in broad daylight without anyone caring. Like no one would care. Plus, even if you weren't like a super powerful boarding house, but you had some money, you could literally just bribe the police and they wouldn't care. Like, they literally like would not care at all. They would just be like, oh, thanks for the money. I'm going to look the other way. I'm glad we're back to the whole bribing police force system, because I was missing that. Go ahead and kidnap this person and put them into indentured slavery forever. I don't care.
Take this, hobo.
Yeah, and literally they wanted to get rid of vagrants. Like the people of Portland were like, whew, I almost thank these boarding house.
Right, and let's face it, people are probably like, well, to be honest, that hobo was gross and bothered me every day on my way to the cotton gin factory. No, I don't know it.
Yes, the cotton gin factory, the factory that makes cotton gins.
You know, what a great time it was for Portland with the cotton gin factory. The invention of the cotton gin factory.
No, but it was true, though. Like, vagrancy was a crime in Portland back then. And you would literally, if you were caught being a vagrant, you would serve like 30 days in prison, but really in prison meant like they shipped you to like a chain gang to break up rocks, right. And then you were banished from the city forever.
They drop you off into the woods,
like literally. You were banished from the city. So they were like, the people of Portland were like, whew, this gets them out of our hair even quicker. It takes the work off the police, and they can focus on other crimes. And it was literally like, it was not only not frowned upon, it was like encouraged by certain people of Portland. They were like, thank God we're getting rid of these farm boys and vagrants. We don't want them around our town.
No siree.
Another thing to point out is there was no mention of a quote-unquote Shanghai tunnel until 1963, when our store owner tried to capitalize on tourist traffic in Portland by putting up a sign offering tours of the quote-unquote Shanghai tunnel in his basement. And that's when you started to see businesses in Chinatown copying that idea by offering tours of their own section of the Shanghai tunnels in their basements. The reason that no one mentioned Shanghai tunnels before 1963 was because there were still people alive at that time that were around during the height of the Chinatown tunnels.
There were crimps still
and they could easily dispute the claims of Shanghaiing happening. It's literally like, tunnels existed. We did some shady shit in the tunnels, but it was mostly like an escape route for us. We were doing our crazy illegal shit above ground, and then when the cops would raid on us, we would use our underground tunnel to escape. Like, that's the level of shadiness that happened in the tunnels. People weren't shanghaied through them. That wasn't a thing. And so the reason that no one ever, like, made this myth and lied about it before 1963 was because literally a number of people could be like, no, that didn't happen.
Right.
And so it wasn't until like most of the people that were around during the turn of the century had died, suddenly it was like, oh, Shanghaiing was a thing. These tunnels were a thing. Let's build this elaborate, crazy, interesting story by molding the two of those sort of stories together and saying that people were shanghaied and fell through trapdoors and tunneled through, or, you know, were carried through these tunnels. Like, the start of the mention, like, the two sort of, there was two very different myths, rumors, whatever you want to say. One is this shanghaiing of people, which honestly didn't even occur that often in Portland, but it did happen. And then the other was this underground tunnel system. And at some point during the 60s, like 1960, the two rumors or two stories merged, excuse me, at a time where no one that was alive when it happened would have been able to dispute the idea that Shanghaiing happened in the tunnels underneath Chinatown. And again, it's just like Shanghaiing, that was, I don't know, I should have looked into it, like why they call it that thing specifically.
Right.
But
why Shanghai?
It was something that was known in like in Britain. Like, that's where they sort of were like, oh yeah, it's this thing we do. It's called Shanghaiing. But I think once it came and started happening in Portland, and honestly, the fact that like Portland at the time, like I said, they were not the most welcoming to Asian immigrants. I think they sort of like saw an opportunity with Chinatown businesses have underground tunnels that literally started just for convenience reasons. And then there was some sort of nefarious stuff happening with like, this is also my escape tunnel, haha, because I'm in a gang, you know. And they sort of just merged the idea of Shanghai, that must mean something with China. These Chinatown businesses have tunnels. They're Shanghaiing people through the tunnels. That must be what it is, you know. And it's really not fair because that wasn't happening. But it's now, like I said in the beginning of the episode, people still, like, if you say, like, because Chris was a nice enough human a couple years ago. He knows that I love history. He knows that I love spooky stuff,
You
ghosts
do.
and all that kind of stuff.
Spooks
and we
spurs.
live in Portland. So he, for my birthday, it was my birthday, right?
Yeah.
He got us like tickets to this like Portland downtown ghost walking tour. And that's when I learned, luckily we took one of the, more truthful tours. And our tour guide told us, a lot of stuff that was like, this isn't true. Like the idea of the Shanghai tunnels, that's not true. This is why it wouldn't be true. This is, like she was very like clear about the fact that like what you think is true is a lie, And so when I've tried to tell people when they bring up, in jobs I've had or whatever, when we start talking about Portland, or if tourists have come into my job asking like, what should I do? Blah, blah, blah. And, I heard the Shanghai tunnel tours were a cool thing. When I've tried to bring up, like, actually, wouldn't you know it? Those, I should mention, they don't exist anymore.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention that. The Shanghai quote unquote tunnels, the tunnels underneath Chinatown, they don't exist anymore. They filled them in years ago. Mostly because vagrants and,
weird thieves guilds were developing down there.
People were occupying these tunnels and doing illegal activities, a lot of drug use, this and that. And so the city of Portland cleared them out of people, and then they filled them because they were like, you know what? We don't use these for shipping anymore. Like, it's this old relic of a thing we don't use anymore. Let's fill them. Let's just rid them. Rid the city of them.
Rid the city.
And so I'll tell people, like, when they say, like, I want to take one of these tours, I'm like, yeah, well, do you realize that the quote-unquote Shanghai tunnels, they don't exist anymore? They're like, no, they do. I went on a tour. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. You walked around someone's basement. Like, it's this sort of, like, tourist trap now.
Oh, yeah.
In Portland, where it's kind of like the Ripley's Museum. Like, it looks like it's upside down, like the Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. Like, it looks like it's upside down when you walk up to it. But reality is that it's just an illusion. It's just a normal structure. That's kind of how the quote-unquote Shanghai tunnels are here in Portland. Like, if you've ever been on a Shanghai tunnel tour, you're literally just walking around someone's basement, and they've made it up and, constructed it to seem as though you're going through a longer tunnel system than you are. They don't exist anymore. They've been filled. There's only, like, a couple feet, maybe, left of the original tunnel under one building in downtown Portland. And fun fact number 2 of the episode, there is a very popular, I won't say it by name because I don't want to get sued, but there is a very popular ghost hunting / exploring, adventuring show that is on TV.
Again, shut up. What's that?
What is that?
Shut
up. What is that?
Hear that?
Anywho, I don't know what that was. We were just talking about nothing. We weren't talking about a specific show. We just do that naturally. They had an entire episode about the Shanghai tunnels, the haunted Shanghai of Portland. And I have it I know for a fact, actually. I was going to say I have it on good authority, but no, I know for a fact that those motherfuckers were in the basement of one building in Old Town Chinatown, downtown Portland, where there's like maybe 2 feet, 3 feet left of the original tunnel system. And they literally walked along for hours and hours and hours upon filming. They were in a basement walking along the length of one wall saying, we're going through the tunnel system now. Oh, here's some other part of the tunnel. Oh, we're exploring these tunnels, as if it was like the fucking catacombs of Paris. They were literally walking back and forth like that duck game at a carnival where you shoot and the duck turns around and then you shoot and the duck turns around. Like, they were just doing that along one wall of a basement, and they try to pass it off as saying, we're in these tunnels. And it's bullshit, because there are no tunnels. There's no tunnels anymore. It's completely not a thing.
Cool if there were, but there's not.
I mean, it'd be cool if there were, but at the same time, it wouldn't be, because I feel like that there's no way the city would be able to regulate
it'd be
what happens.
It'd be like Underworld Portland. You know, all kinds of shit goes on down there. All the ghouls could live there.
I think it would just be a lot of people, like, living and defecating and shooting drugs.
Our building would be so much more quiet.
They'd all live there, rent-free. Do the same things they're doing now.
The people in our building are crazy.
I was going to say, in case you didn't know, the people in our building are crazy.
I love it.
So yeah, it's just really funny. So if any of you ever plan on coming to Portland, I will say that there's like a fun sort of like, you know, wink, you know, tongue in cheek sort of like wink to the camera, like a notion to doing the Shanghai tunnel tours. There's even a bar, like the Shanghai tunnel is a bar.
It's a cozy bar. It's a lovely bar.
It's just a basement bar, basically.
Yeah.
But like, come into it with the knowledge that it's not really real. It's just like, it's a magician's sort of smoke and mirrors illusion of a nod to something that used to be, but, you know, isn't anymore. And just have fun with that, I would say. Like, have fun with the idea that, like, oh, this used to be something. And I'm sure the people that will be doing the tours will have these fun sort of stories and facts and history. If you like history, it will be probably fun for you.
Oh, sure.
But you're not actually going to go through any fucking tunnels that ever existed in the turn of the century, because those bitches have been filled long ago.
Oh, yeah, they gone.
They fucking gone.
Filled with hobo skeletons and basalt. Pacific Northwest.
But, yeah, so that was a little piece of Portland history, Portland modern, still going on. Portland is a very sort of historical city, like a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, like I said, when I was talking about these people,
Portland.
There's still streets named after them, things named after them. Like, we do appreciate our history here in Portland, and the Shanghai tunnels is definitely part of that. It's just should be known.
Oh yeah.
That they are not what they have. The myth is not real.
Mm-mm.
And, yeah. But if you come to Portland, or if you've been to Portland, or if you've ever been on the Shanghai Tunnel tour, like, leave a comment on this video on YouTube. Can you leave comments on SoundCloud?
Yes, you can.
Or on SoundCloud. Leave a comment. Tell us what you thought of the Shanghai tunnels. Tell us if you've ever seen a ghost in the Shanghai Tunnel tour that you've been through. Because apparently all of them are quote-unquote haunted.
Oh, every single one.
Tell us if you ever want to come to Portland. You know, give us
tell us about the time you were Shanghaied.
Or, you know, if that's the case, tell us your exact location and we will call the police and the proper authorities to make sure that you are going to get home safe. Mm-hmm. Okay?
And we'll send you a nice package.
Yeah, we'll send you some Bazooka Joe bubblegum.
And some of Courtney Cox's headshots.
Yes. From the 1800s. Mm-hmm. She was making headshots back then. She was actually one of the first known photographs when the technology became when it came into life. She was like, let me take a headshot.
She is Wonder Woman.
She is. Mm. Ooh. Ooh. Well, on that note, did I tell you about the Shanghai Tunnel? Did I do a good job at explaining all of the history of the or do you have questions?
I mean, if you mean smashing all my fun beliefs that it was like a slave network, yeah, you did that really well.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad that I did, because...
But now I'll seem educated at parties. If I went in there just talking about what I thought, oh boy, would I have seen like
this is
dunce.
For anyone who lives in Portland, like, take this, use this, utilize it. This is such a fun thing to pull out at parties, just to, like, fuck with the people that have lived here for a long time or their whole lives. Just be like, oh, that thing you believe happened? Let me tell you the truth.
Also, it's Couch Street. that's for Portland people.
No one that is going to know what you're talking about.
What the fuck are you talking about?
It's actually Cooch Street. To anyone that's not from Portland, they're going to, just so you know.
It's very esoteric.
There's a street in Portland. It's spelled Couch. Every tourist calls it Couch Street, as they should, because that's how it's spelled.
That's how it's spelled.
But it's named after a person. The pronunciation of that person's last name is Cooch.
Yeah.
It's weird. It's funny.
Dear Tay.
So, did I, hey, babe.
Yeah, babe.
To answer your question about the Shanghai tunnels?
You sure did. This is a good job. I know so much about it now. Thank you. My query has been answered.
The more you know. All right, so if you liked that podcast, you should definitely like and subscribe to our channel and then hit that bell notification because you will then see every time we post a new awesome video. All of the links that we have below are to our other outlets like Instagram, SoundCloud, and Gmail. Thank you so much for listening. We hope to have you back again because you're awesome. All right, bye.